In our gospel reading, again, this week comes from Matthew. We are still in Holy Week, and this is what comes immediately after we looked at last week, and then the week before that. So we've got three parables right in a row with each other. Jesus said, "Listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard. He put a fence around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a tower. Then he rented it to tenant farmers and took a trip. When it was time for the harvest, he sent his servants to the tenant farmers to collect his fruit. But the tenant farmers grabbed his servants. They beat some, and some of them they killed, and some of them they stoned to death. Again, he sent other servants, more than the first group, and they treated them in the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, 'They will respect my son.' But when the tenant farmers saw the son, they said to each other, 'This is the heir. Come on, let's kill him, and we can have his inheritance.' They grabbed him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. When the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenant farmers?" They said, "He will totally destroy those wicked farmers and rent the vineyard to other tenant farmers who will give him the fruit when it's ready." Jesus said to them, "Haven't you ever heard the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord God has done this, and it's amazing in our eyes. Therefore, I tell you that God's kingdom will be taken away from you and will be given to a people who produce its fruit. Whoever falls on this stone will be crushed, and the stone will crush the person it falls on." Now, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard the parable, they knew Jesus was talking about them. They were trying to arrest him, but they feared the crowds who thought he was a prophet. So this is Thanksgiving weekend, and our passage for today is one of the least Thanksgiving-y readings that I can think of having for this day. I know I primed you for this at the beginning of the service, but as I was reading that, how many of y'all were thinking, this is the perfect Thanksgiving passage? No one. If you're watching on YouTube, no one raised their hand. Yeah, this is not that very Thanksgiving-y. It starts out with promise, but then it takes that hard turn away from Thanksgiving. And this parable is one that, if I'm honest, I have to say I have struggled to understand this parable for years. It's not an easy one, and y'all know me by now. You know if it's a hard parable, you know I like to stew on it and turn it over and try to figure out what in the world is going on with it. I haven't quite gotten there with this one. I have this sense that Jesus is doing something profound with this parable, and I felt like I was about to be able to verbalize it this week. But my experience trying to think about that has been like if you've ever had your mind go blank and you know that you know the word, but you can't remember the word, and it's on the tip of your tongue, but you can never get it. That's kind of what this sermon's been doing on my brain. It's right here. I just haven't been able to figure that one out yet. And I could tell all week that that sermon that's sitting right here was probably not going to come by the time I actually had to write the sermon. Because, Sunday at 10:30 comes around with some impressive regularity. The only deviations are daylight savings starting and ending. And so when it came time that, I actually have to start writing this sermon, it was still sitting right here. And it's still sitting right here, to be honest. So I thought to myself, can this be a Thanksgiving sermon? Can this be a Thanksgiving parable? The last 3 weeks we've been talking about parables, about vineyards, and the different going-ons with different vineyards. And today we finally get to a parable that includes the harvest explicitly. That sounds kind of Thanksgiving-like. And even the way the owner sets up this vineyard for his success, there's great care done with this. That sounds kind of Thanksgiving-like. We give thanks for the labor that we put into things that turn around and produce fruit. Like that's really great Thanksgiving stuff. But then it turns away when the owner decides to rent it out to other people and takes a trip. I think for me, that's the moment that this turns away from the Thanksgiving sermon, away from the Thanksgiving parable, and into something else. You don't typically do this hard labor just to turn it over to somebody else. That's not how we typically do things. And I kind of want to know, where was this guy going on a trip that lasted the entire harvest season or the entire growing season? Where did this guy go? We don't know. It's not important. That's just a curiosity that I want to understand. At the harvest, the owner sends the servants to collect the fruit, but the farmers beat them and kill some of them. Very hard turn away from Thanksgiving. So the owner sends more slaves to collect the fruit again, and the tenant farmers do the exact same thing. And I think it's odd and important to notice that the owner does not send this second group of servants armed to go and collect. That's an odd thing that happens. And then it's even more odd that the owner says, well, here's my son. They will respect my son, and my son will be able to collect the harvest that I am due. And again, the son is sent without any kind of weapon or armament or protection. It's a very interesting thing. It would be expected and assumed that the owner would send some kind of armed guards. Like, they just killed my other servants. I'm going to send something to protect them with. Going to retake my vineyard by force and maybe even with violence. Like, let's call the cops, get the cops involved. This is illegal. This is wrong. Or maybe even something more robust than that. Instead, he attempts to gather the fruit 3 times through what we think of and see as abnormally peaceful means. That's the sermon that's sitting right here that I haven't been able to figure out what to do with. It hasn't quite materialized just yet as a full sermon. And when the tenants see the son, they decide to treat him the same way that they had done the others so they could get the inheritance. This logic doesn't make sense. Inheritance laws don't work that way, never have, but let's play with it. So they kill the son, and that's where this parable ends. And Jesus turns again to the chief priests and the elders and asks, what is this owner going to do? You finish this parable for me. And it's here and only here that we get words of judgment and vengeance pronounced in this reading. And we should note that it's not Jesus who makes this pronouncement. He is not the one who proclaims vengeance will occur. Jesus doesn't say what the landowner is going to do. But if Jesus is telling a story about a consistent landowner, which he tends to do, it's safe to assume that chances are the next thing to happen is that the owner himself is going to go to this vineyard without any form of protection or armament to try to get the fruit of his vineyard in a nonviolent and peaceful way. And that seems to be what Jesus is about to say, but that's not the response that the Pharisees and elders give. And again, that's the sermon I really wanted to write this week. But I keep hitting a roadblock there. So how about Thanksgiving? Even with all of the humans being full of deceit, theft, violence, just general dysfunction, this vineyard still produced fruit. I was listening to the news this week, I believe it was Wednesday or Thursday, and I was amazed to hear the statistic that only in the ballpark of 6 to 8% of Ukraine's farmland was not farmed this year, even with the war going on. And that because they've had good weather, their harvest overall has been what would be expected in a normal year. Even with all that devastation, even with all that dysfunction, the earth produces fruit. There's something beautiful and hopeful about that. And it certainly merits deep gratitude. I think we can also appreciate and agree that these tenants in this parable are not behaving in a Christ-like way, that they're actively working against the way of Christ, we could even say. That they're trying to undermine the way of Jesus. but yet they still produced fruit. Even with their dysfunction, they still produced fruit. Maybe the invitation is for us to celebrate the good fruit that is produced in this world, even if it's produced in a different or weird way that we just don't understand, or by people that we do not expect it to come from. If someone is producing Christ-like fruit, we should celebrate that and give thanks for what they are doing in this world, even if it makes absolutely no sense to us how it actually produced fruit. But y'all remember the fruit of the Spirit chant? Okay, the go fruit. All right, do you remember the acronym? LJPPKGFGS, go fruit. Okay, let's do it again, all right? LJPPKGFGS, go fruit. One more time. I'm sensing some silence coming from right there, okay? All right. LJPPKGFGS, go fruit. All right, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Even if it makes no sense how those fruit got produced to us, if it doesn't line up with who this person is in our mind or who these people are, we should still celebrate it and give thanks. Because the fruit of the Spirit are beautiful and worth having everywhere in this world, and we should cultivate them however we can. And I also think that we should give thanks that Jesus and God are not the ones who pronounce vengeance in this parable. The land, I'm sorry. I should be. The landowner never seeks to retaliate, but continues to offer nonviolent means for the tenants to do what is right and what is just. We can give thanks that God is not the one who seeks vengeance and punishment, but continually offers grace and peace. We can give thanks that God is the one who seeks to end the cycle of violence and trauma most of us have experienced in this life, even if it means that God endures that violence and that trauma too. So let's give thanks that even though we are not perfect, much like these tenant farmers, we can still produce good fruit. Let's also celebrate that most people are not so selfish and greedy as these tenants. Most of us are not that. Let's recognize that fact, and that together we can share the abundance of this world, whether it be actual fruit like the apples from your tree, or the fruit of the Spirit that you nurture in yourself and others. Let's recognize that and make an intentional decision to use those fruit, to share those fruit, to make this world more and more like the beautiful garden God created and designed and hopes this world will be.